What I'll do is, if you have questions as I go, I'll at various points stop and ask if there's any questions. So feel free to pitch in either audio. I see a bunch of you've got mics. What you might want to do is mute your microphones while I'm talking, just so we don't get any background noise from others. But then feel free, I'll stop at various points and have some time at the end as well for questions. I also have a second window up with the chat, so you can type chats at any point and I'll keep an eye on that, so feel free to do that. So thought what we'd do today is just sort of a quick whirlwind tour of what we're doing with Globus Online for simplifying big data transfer and sharing. And I'll start with a few slides, and then I'll spend most of the time actually doing a live demo and show particularly some of the new features too that we've got in here. But as a little bit of context, I think it's kind of useful to understand what's driving us, what's motivating us with this Globus Online effort, which helps you understand kind of where we're going with it as well. And what's behind it is, I had spent, of course, too long at Argonne building Globus for lots of communities. Went out, started a commercial company, spent about 5 years, trying to do sort of high performance computing in the commercial world, and then came back to University of Chicago, rejoined Ian Foster here about 4 or 5 years ago, realizing that what really enjoyed and what we really had all along been trying to do was help researchers get their work done, but B, recognized that this community has often a dearth of very good quality software, and that gap has, I think, only grown in recent years. I mean, if I look around at the consumer markets and the commercial, like small, medium business and enterprise markets, there's all sorts of great tools for helping those businesses and consumers do what they want to do, delivered in very compelling online ways. And these are a few examples on this slide. My 7-year-old daily streams gigabytes of data to our house with Netflix, and it just works. Gmails, Flickr for photo sharing. And we started asking, 4 or 5 years ago, why isn't it like that for researchers? Why don't we have the same quality and same quality of really advanced capabilities for our research workflows? And that, it's got us thinking about what makes these services great. And we sort of boiled it down to, if you will, 2 main things. The first, of course, is great user experience. We have a long history, I think, in our community of putting up with tools that sort of work and have often pretty bad user experiences, or moderate user experiences, but they're better than anything else we've had. But if you compare that to the likes of all the modern online software as a service systems out there, what really distinguishes them is this great user experience. Second is this just great infrastructure, this cloud infrastructure, high performance, scalable, that's just out there and just works but is invisible, right? So that the service can actually be offered at scale, globally, with high availability, good performance, all this sort of stuff. And so that really got us thinking, okay, what could we really contribute to the research world that brings some of this to bear? And this led us down this path towards looking at research data management. How can we deliver a great user experience to the science community for research data management? And pithy phrases, what would a Dropbox for science look like? Something that there's a sort of level of simplicity, but can really deal with all of your data. So to go into that, we decided to start in a fairly mundane place, right? To some extent, we view our mission is make the mundane easy, right? And so you're not having to spend your time, babysitting things and doing things, so you can focus on the science. And so we started sort of very simple with file transfers or managed file transfer, and then have been moving up into sharing, which is what I'll show today. And we've got a bunch of other stuff coming down the pipe that keeps growing out in terms of the types of data and the life cycle of that data. But starting with these areas, something that should be very easy, streaming this data around, moving it to where I need it from my instruments to my storage systems to my community, sharing it, archiving it, mirroring it, publishing it, all these sorts of things should be easy, but we're always running into obstacles. I mean, there are systems with NATs and firewalls and security issues. you start talking big data, of course, things are going to fail. There are servers and networks, systems. That's how they're built, and even more so as you go into the cloud world. That it's about scale out, but not trying to get high reliability on any component. So how do you make overall systems that are reliable, even in the face of the sort of routine failures of the individual components? Permissions, things like that. And this slide is one from our friends at ESNet. Which is the DOE network, kind of like Internet 2, but for DOE. And the reason I put this slide in as much as anything is to say, we are blessed with bandwidth in the research community. And because of that, things that often many scientists don't think is feasible in terms of the amount of data that I can be moving around actually are, right? I often talk to scientists and say, you got a terabyte of data. Oh, I can't move that. I can't do. What am I going to do with that? How do I do anything but keep it locally on my drive? And what this chart is meant to show is what sort of bandwidths are required to move a certain amount of data a certain time, right? So a terabyte of data is easy, right? Even on today's network. So the white section is sort of today's 1 gigabit and 10 gigabit networks. What is easy to do on those networks if you have the right tools? And even moving 10 terabytes can do that overnight, no big deal, right? We routinely sustain multi-gigabit per second transfers over weeks at a time between places like Argonne and NERSC and other well-connected sites. So the point is we have the bandwidth. What we're missing often is the tools. So the tools to make it really easy. And so that's what we're all about is, basically the high level takeaway for today is, what is Globus Online? It's about big data transfer and sharing with Dropbox-like simplicity directly from your own storage systems, right? We all probably use, certainly I do, and most of the people I know use Dropbox for doing things like sharing my Microsoft Word files and my small things. But we wanted to say, how can I actually have that same kind of user experience in terms of trivial to get my accounts, trivial to share my data to other users, but on my terabyte data sets. And one of the sort of corollaries of that is also doing that from my own storage systems, because the traditional kind of Dropbox style cloud storage models tend to break down both performance and price wise when you talk in terms of terabytes of data if you have to centrally synchronize it through these systems. And so that's in a nutshell what we're trying to do with Globus Online. So two main sets of functionality then that I'll show you today. First one is file transfer and synchronization, right? So this is, my data sitting in one spot. I've got accounts at various systems and ability to use various resources, and I need to get my data from one spot to another spot, right, between my systems. And so the model there that we have is you sort of go to our cloud service, to our software as a service system, Globus Online, hand your request off. It then mediates the transfer directly between the source and destination. The data doesn't flow through us; it goes directly between the storage systems, which of course is important if you want to get the advantages of those networks that we're blessed with. But we're able to monitor and manage it all, recover from faults, tune it for performance, and then also make this work nicely across multiple security domains. So even if I'm going between my own machines and my campus clusters and my Exceed supercomputers, or wherever I'm going around with, we can sort of navigate these distinct security environments. More recently, we've now introduced and are in late beta testing of sort of extending that functionality to offer sharing, which is instead of just me transferring between my own resources, me being able to give you access to my data from my systems directly from my storage systems that from my HPC cluster, from my laptop or wherever, so that you can download or upload, basically make use of that storage system remotely without all the hassles of needing your own account on those systems. And so I'll show that today as well. And then finally, last introduction before I get into the actual demo, we deliver all of this as software as a service, right? And so what this means is, this is a service that we at University of Chicago, the Globus team, run as a service to the nonprofit research community. It has, it's an online web application-based system, so we have good web GUIs, REST interfaces behind that, so that if you want to integrate this capability into your own services, your own web applications, things like that, that's really easy to do. In fact, everything you'll see of our web applications, our web interfaces, are implemented on top of our public REST API. So basically, if If you want to do something similar but different, you can do all that through these REST APIs. Then we also have a command line, which I'll just show in very quick passing today, but it's really designed for people doing scripting and the like. So it's a very nice little interface for that. And going along with all these technical capabilities is of course, it's a service. It's not just software running. We have a help desk. We have a support team that helps, make sure this stuff is working. And of course, a big advantage of software as service is we're continually updating this thing. Just about every week we're fixing bugs, adding new features, these sorts of things as a service, and all that just happens, right, without you even seeing it. And finally, one of the things I'll also show today is, of course, if we're talking a service that's all about moving your data around amongst all the systems you need it to get to, you have to be able to connect all those systems to this Globus Online cloud. And for that, we have a family of tools we call Globus Connect. They're sort of part of the Globus toolkit, part of that open source distribution, that make it very, very easy now to connect your own resources. Literally, and I'll show the desktop one, and there's a server one will be just as easy. And so with that, let's go into demonstration. As software as a service, as a web application, you got to go to the web, right? So works with standard browsers, Chrome, Safari, Firefox, IE, reasonably modern versions of all those. Go to our globusonline.org homepage, and there's a variety of good information up here, about use cases and case studies. Another good site to know about is our support site, support.globusonline.org. And in particular, there's some forums here that are quite useful with facts and troubleshooting and documentation on things like the Globus Connects and the like. So I encourage you to use that. And if you have questions, don't hesitate to submit support tickets either through this or through the support at Globus Online email address. But let's go ahead and do it. So as a new user, of course, I need to sign up. And as a web application, it's what you'd expect, right? So enter your name, email, if I can type, username. I see I've got too many accounts already. Password, if I want to see what I typed, I can do that through there. Agree to terms of service, and very occasional emails, updates on the service. Promise we won't spam you. Now, normally I'd hit register and you're off and running, but I've already got too many accounts, as you saw. So I'm going to show you go straight to login, and go ahead and log into my account. And so what this will do by default is take you to the dashboard. But let's go straight on into things. The main menu items we have are things related to transfers, starting my transfers, viewing how things are going, endpoints, groups I'll come back to in a little bit, and then various things for managing my profile and other such, and you'll see little bits of that as I go. So let's go ahead and do a first transfer. So what I'll do is log in to a couple places. Every user, well, the first thing I have to do is go to what we call an endpoint. And an endpoint is just a simple name for a storage system that's connected to Globus Online, via Grid FTP or Globus Connect, so that Globus Online can manage my transfers to or from that system. And the naming of endpoints is something hash something. It's a username hash and then an endpoint name relative to that name. Any user can create an endpoint name. By default, only I see my own, but I can make them available so others can see them. So, I have one endpoint that's actually my iMac at Argonne. If I look at things like Exceed has a bunch of endpoints, OSG has a bunch of endpoints, University of Chicago Research Computing Center has a set of endpoints, NERSC, right? So most of the major national facilities, open science facilities, already have endpoints up. A lot of campuses are getting them. But like I said, you can always install your own as a user, and/or we've got the tools that makes it trivial for your administrators to put the Globus Connect onto your clusters to get them connected as well, so that they'll work just like you're going to see these work in a moment. So let's go ahead and pick one. Let's go ahead to, I'll pick Exceed Trestles. This is a machine out at San Diego Supercomputing Center. And what we need to do, I forgot to deactivate a few things. So pay no attention to the man behind the curtain for a moment here while I didn't reset my state entirely before this demo. Sorry about this. thought I did this, but well, I won't worry about it. You'll see it in a moment. So I log into a system, and well, let me go to another one so you'll see that one. So I'll go to second one, University of Chicago's Research Computing Center. So I'll go to Midway. Okay, right. And this is what I must have gone to Exceed recently, because I've already got some security stuff cached to be able to use Exceed without logging in. But normally, the first time you go to any given endpoint, you have to log into it, right? You have to provide the right security passwords, whatever, to talk to that storage system. And this is what we call activating the endpoint. It's sort of logging into it and getting back a short-term ticket that Globus Online can use to access that resource for some period of time. So for example, I go to UC-RCC, which is the University of Chicago's Research Computing Center. In this case, what it needs is a login using my University of Chicago Shibboleth in-common identity, my normal campus identity. And so I'll do that. If I can type, use my single sign-on one password system. It'll redirect me now back through to Globus Online, log me into that endpoint. And so now I'm logged into two different systems, you know, a supercomputer that requires my Exceed password and that, my University of Chicago system, and now I can do transfer. So I can pick a file and say transfer. And so now what I've done, it says transfer request submitted successfully. It doesn't mean the transfer is complete, it means it's been handed off to Globus. Globus Online is now trying to make that happen. So I can look at the status of it by going to view transfers. Now I see it's done. I can click on either the menu bar or on the task ID and see more information about it, where it's from and to and options and things like that. I can even go into detailed event logs, so I can see everything going on. So if there's faults, for example, those will get put in the event log so you can diagnose when things are not working correctly. So that's sort of the first transfer, right? So summary came in, got an account, logged into two systems, fired up a transfer. A few other options we have on the transfer. If you go down to the bottom here, I can put labels on transfer. So let me do a little bigger one for the fun of it. Let's go take this my project directory and we'll load that over to Trestles. So we'll call that my second transfer as a label. Got some options. I can say things like synchronize or mirror, only transfer files that have changed since the last time. So if I want to keep a destination mirrored against a source, I can select this option. Delete files on destination don't exist on the source, right? So if I remove something from the source and sync, do you want it to go away from the destination? You can preserve timestamps, right? So these first three options are sort of the moral equivalent of rsync minus AV minus minus delete, if you're familiar with rsync. So we got various options there. We have verify file integrity after transfer, and you notice that's on by default. And this is basically what's happening here is after the transfer is complete, we'll actually reread the data back from disk, do MD5 checksums on it, and ensure that it actually transferred successfully. And this is just based on the experience of high energy physics community and many other of the big science communities that have been doing big data for a while. Is TCP is not reliable from a sort of, you can have undetected bit changes in your transmissions. You can have that in your storage systems, your file systems, sort of up and down the line. So we do this as an extra check to check the integrity of that. And then finally, if you want, you can turn on encryption. By default, we authenticate, but we don't encrypt. And that's just because encryption has a cost to it, and often we in the science community don't care. But if you want to encrypt the data on top of it, you can. So let's go ahead and submit this bigger one. So now it's off and running. Can go back over to the view transfers. Now we can see my second transfer and event log. It's probably doing the directory listing, yes, scanning the directory to figure what files are in that folder that need to transfer. So we're going to just let that run in the background now for a while we go on with the rest of the demo. So I'll pause there for a minute and ask any questions that you have at this point.
I have one question, Steve. What would happen if you were to grab a folder which has more data in it than on the source side than you have space available on the destination?
Right, good question. So the fault model in Globus Online is effectively we'll treat any fault that's encountered along the way as potentially recoverable, which means we'll keep trying, as long for, well, the model is basically we'll keep trying as long as the transfer is making progress, and for 3 days after that. So if things just stop working, things stop making progress, we'll try for 3 more days, but you'll also get some notification of this, that it's stalled out, not making progress. And so in a case like that, what you would see is if you see that, oh, my transfer is stalled, I'm not making progress, I could go look in here, and we've got some new stuff, new interfaces coming soon on this will make this even easier. But where I can basically say, show me the event logs and what are the last faults that I've run into. And typically what you'll see here on that particular example is quota exceeded or out of disk space. And so then it's up to you. Do you want to cancel it, which you can do from this panel by checking and hitting cancel? Or if you free up some space on the destination, then the transfer will just pick up right where it left off. Wherever it got to, it won't retransmit anything that was already transferred, but just keep moving. And that's true, like I said, of really about any fault at this point. There's a few special cases at the moment of things like a security credential expiring. So suppose, remember the activation model is I log in and I get back this ticket for some period of time as part of activating the endpoint. And that period is actually dependent on the identity system, and it tends to range anywhere from 12 hours to 12 days. And so if I'm doing a transfer that it goes over that, what'll happen is we'll just suspend your transfer, notify you that you need to re-authenticate. We'll give you a URL in that email that you click on to come back to Globus Online, go through that activation step again, and then the transfer will just immediately start up right where it left off and keep going. Any other questions? All right, I'll keep pushing then. So the first thing I showed you, of course, was doing transfers between existing systems, a couple existing facilities. But of course, there's lots of other systems out there that I might want to make use of. For example, my laptop. So for that, what we need to do is put Globus Connect on my system, right? Connect my laptop to the Globus Online cloud so that Globus Online can now interact with it. So the model's a lot like Dropbox in that sense, that you've got this agent. You see I'm a Dropbox user, right? You have this agent that runs in the background. All I do is set preferences on it, and that connects my system to the cloud. So that's exactly what Globus Connect is. So let's go ahead and do it. So I'll go into here. We'll call this endpoint tiki hash my laptop and generate a setup key. Go ahead and copy and paste that. We'll download the Mac binary. We have versions for lots and lots of different, for Mac, Linux, and Windows. It's been tested on a zillion different flavors of those. Let's go ahead and install it. Drag and drop installer. Windows, it's got a typical Windows installer. And then if we go and start it up, let's connect, open. And it's going to ask me for one question. Oh yeah, I've been debugging a new version. Again, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain here. I've been debugging a new version that is leaving cruft around. So let me start that up again. There we go. Have my setup key. And now I'm up, right? And so I've now got this Globus Connect running in the background. It's not a client. I don't interact with it directly other than setting things like preferences. And the main preference you want to know about is what part of your local system can you access via the Globus Online service. And by default, it's your home directory, but denying access to your .dot files, your .ssh and .login and stuff like that. If you've got, for example, another USB disk or something like that that you want to connect, you would pick that disk, add it. If you want to make it read-write, just basically do these sorts of things to decide what you have access to locally. But having done that, now, oops, get to the right window here. Now it's just an endpoint, just like any other endpoint. So now I can go to tiki hash my laptop, and I'm now logged in back onto this system. Or for example, I showed you that one earlier of TKA and LIMAC, or I mentioned that earlier. This is actually my Mac desktop at work, right? So I have access now to my various systems and I can do transfers to them. So for example, if I go to my laptop, take, I don't know, let's take this file 4 and download it to my laptop. It usually doesn't take long, so if I refresh it, and there it is. So, and just to show that it really is my laptop, here's my home directory, and there's files 1 through 4, different sort order, but it's my laptop directory, right? So again, trying to make it really easy to get all your systems connected. As I mentioned, we have a server version we call Globus Connect Multi-User that is just Debian and RHEL packages, again, for a lot of different flavors that you can install with apt and yum. And if you want to see more on those, just go out to this documentation page out at support.globusonline.org or support.globusonline.org, and it has the main install instructions plus a lot of different variants and firewall configs and all that sort of stuff for the server version. A nice property of the desktop version, the Globus Connect that I installed here, is it's made to run behind NATs and firewalls, so you don't have to open any inbound ports to it. It sort of makes everything work outbound. As long as it can connect out, it should work just fine. Let's see, and it's also designed for, you know, shutting the laptop down, bringing it up, all that sort of stuff. So it's basically the desktop versus the server version. So that's Globus Connect. Again, I'll pause there. Any questions before I move on?
I've got just one. So Steve, like with some of these endpoints, I mean, obviously, you know, some of them can be significant storage endpoints with lots of data behind them, and maybe it's connected to a, you know, a 10 gig host and so forth. Do you have any, I mean, in terms of like if you start a large transfer, do you have monitoring tools? I mean, there's the page that you went to before, which is giving you a progress bar. Do you have anything that tells you, for example, the aggregate megabytes per second that are the transfers?
Yeah, that actually is in this panel here. So if we go in there, you can see, I guess we currently are not showing megabytes per second, although actually I think this is a page that we're in the midst of redesigning right now. So there's some stuff that's going to be showing up in sort of in a better fashion. But actually in this one, I think there's, thought it was in here somewhere. I certainly got the bytes transferred. Yeah, so I know that's one that's on the plan to make the megabytes per second available. So the idea is the view transfer activity is to see my stuff. There's also an option that's part of our paid service I'll talk about a little bit later that we call flight control at the moment, which is a management console that the administrators of the endpoint can see the activity to and from their endpoint, so that you as an administrator can provide, you know, it's an ops console, you can provide more proactive support. So I can see transfers going on to various resources. I can see them by user. If there's faults, they're called out, and I can drill into those and see what sort of events and faults we're hitting. Right, and this page is also getting redesigned as we speak as well. But the upshot is we have these sort of different views, sort of an end user view on their transfer activity and a systems administrator view on the activity against their endpoint.
Got it. Okay, very nice. Steve, there was a question over here in the chat box from Miha.
Who are the users for Globus today? A high-level description, right? Good question. So also, with the stuff I've shown you so far, I'm just about to show you the sharing, which will actually broaden the answer to the question. But for the transfer and synchronization, our users today are most often users of, for example, HPC facilities or scientific, you know, various facilities where they're either uploading or downloading data from that facility. So it might be, you know, the supercomputing centers, the campus clusters, things like that. Or other examples is some of the scientific computing, or the scientific instruments. So for example, we're starting to see more and more use around in genetic sequencing, where I send off my sample to somewhere like Broad Institute. They do the sequencing, get the terabyte or so of data that they need to get back to me, and using that for downloading, way for me to get my data back from that sort of service, right? So it's sort of schlepping my big data around amongst all the different places it might need to be, output of simulation results from supercomputers, things like that. With the sharing, this significantly broadens, because now it becomes a tool by which project teams can also share data with each other, not just sort of upload, download around my jobs, if you will. And so I'll show that in a moment. Does that kind of answer your question? So why don't I go on then and go ahead and show the sharing, and that'll cover most of the functionality. So as I said, the use case on sharing is, let me go to a different endpoint here, to UCRCC, which is running the newer version with the sharing beta turned on it. So but it's the same, actually, it's the same file system. This is the University of Chicago's. It's a GPFS file system in their research computing center. This could be backed by whatever. It could be a normal Linux file system, GPFS, Lustre, Ceph, whatever is your sort of file system du jour. I guess one other thing I should mention is that you can also, if you mentioned sort of, if I'm talking 10 gigabit networks and stuff like that, something that you very commonly need to do to sustain the high data rates is you actually need to install multiple of the Globus Connect or GridFTP servers in front of that file system. And usually that's because of the file system, not the network. Is that, a lot of these parallel file systems in particular are designed so that they can't necessarily sustain 10 gigabits per second of I/O to one single server, but they can easily sustain 10 gigabits per second to 3 servers or 5 servers or things like that in parallel. And so by running multiple GridFTP servers connected to that same cluster file system, you can configure your endpoint to have all of those servers, and we'll automatically load balance and fail over between them. And if one goes down, we'll map it out for a while until we see it come back, and so make all the right stuff happen there. So anyway, this is the GPFS file system, University of Chicago, my home file system. And what I'd like to be able to do is say, I got this directory here, my project, and I would like to share this out to another user, but that user does not have an account on this local system, right? So historically, what this meant was lots of hassle, either trying to get this person an account at University of Chicago and at RCC, which could take days to weeks and is a real pain. It might mean using some other service to sort of put it somewhere where they can fetch it and download it, or it might mean mailing them a disk, right? Lots of different ways we hack around this problem. What I want is something as simple as Dropbox, which is share it with this user, right? And so that's what we've created with our new sharing capability. So I can take this directory in this file system, and there's a drop down here which has things like creating folders and deleting files and stuff like that. But it also has an option to share. So let me go ahead and select that. So when I want to share, the first thing I do is I create an endpoint and give it a name. So you can think of this like a mount point or a volume export name. I'm not actually copying anything. I'm only really creating this virtual name of an endpoint called tiki hash my project share, which is really backed by that underlying endpoint. We call it the host endpoint, UCC sharing my account tilde project. So think of it like a virtual change rooted overlay on that underlying system. But again, now it's an endpoint. So you'll see over here, if I go here, now it's another endpoint, and that ought to look a lot like what's in the my project directory over here, because it's exactly the same bits on disk, right? Just different virtual names for them. But now having done that, I can trivially share it out. So I can say, I've got another user over in this other browser in Safari. I've logged in as user SJT, just so the cookies don't collide between the two browsers. And so what I want to do over here is say, let's share out this endpoint with user SJT. And let's make it read-writable. Now I can go over here as SJT, go to Start Transfers, go to tiki hash, I believe it was called, it should autofill. There it is, my project share. And now I have access to this. So I can create folders. I'll go create a folder 4. And all I'm doing really now here is directly accessing that underlying system. Again, so if I refresh here, we'll see that folder 4. If we refresh here, we'll see the folder 4. Right? So it's that same underlying system. But now everything else is the same. As SJT, I can now do transfers in and out of that file system. Everything kind of just works from then on. And we have fine-grained access controls on this. So for example, let me turn off write permissions for SJT, and you'll see now if I try and create another folder, it's going to fail. Oops, missed the button. And so now it says path not allowed. Or if I get rid of the permissions entirely for SJT, refresh this, SJT will now get a could not access thing. Okay, so I see a couple questions. It'd be nice to share with existing VOs or groups of these, right? So that's a good tee up for my next, for the next part of this, right? Is that we, of course, in the science community, don't tend to work with individual users. I mean, we do, but we also very often tend to work in groups, right? I have my project team that I want to work with to do stuff. And so for that, what we've got now in Globus Online is a really end user facing group management capability. Okay, I'll look above. Questions have scrolled off by now. Just look above. Okay. So we've got this new group management capability where I, as an end user, can define my groups, my project teams. So for example, I create this Globus team group. As an administrator of it, I can, modify the description of it. I can see who the members are. And notice SJT is a member of this group. I'll make use of this in a moment. You can have subgroups of groups, so I can, and it'll maintain proper memberships and admissions and all that sort of stuff. And importantly, of course, is policies. I can set various policies on this group. I can say things like, who is the group visible, right? Only to all logged in users or only to other group members. So I can sort of have invisible groups, private groups if you want. I can say who are member names visible to, so I don't have to publish that information. Is it to all users, to members of the group, or only to the administrators? I can say who can create subgroups, whether people can request to join the group or if they can only be invited, and then what happens if somebody requests to join a group. We have policies where I can say if somebody requests to join a group, here's some extra fields I need them to fill out. And right now it's a set of fields, but we'll be soon making this extensible so you can put any information you want in there. And then of course I can invite users. If I go to this menu over here, right, I can say things like invite people to this group, and I can either invite them by email, so I can just type in an email address here, like, I don't know, let's come here. I do by, right, so I could send an invitation to a particular email address, and they'll get a link in there that they can then follow that'll ask them, do you have an account? If so, log in. If not, you can create one. So all the normal workflows you'd expect there. Or I can search by specific user. So if I want to look for Rachna on my team, I can search for that and say, let's invite her, right? So all the sort of basic stuff you'd expect of group management. And then as any given group, the roles, you can be administrator, manager, or member, where administrators have full control, managers control membership, but can't change policies, and then, of course, members are members. So the whole point of this, of course, is so that you can use these groups for useful stuff, right? So let me go back over to my sharing and say, okay, what I now want to do is I've got this shared endpoint, my project share. I want to say, I just want to share this one folder within that shared endpoint, experiment 2, with that Globus team group. So you notice I had that selected, so it's showing up as the path here. And go into the search and search for Globus team TE. Should find it. Yep. There it is. I'll select it. You can see that same information about the group. And I'll give read write. And so now we can see, experiment 2 directory is shared with the Globus team group. So now if I jump back over to my SJT account, remember SJT is in that Globus team group, refresh it again, now SJT only sees that one directory within the shared endpoint. We sort of mask all of the other information that they don't have any access control rights to see. Now, one last question, or one last aspect with respect to Alan, your question is that this, of course, is all groups intended for users to sort of manage their own groups in the system. But also, as I said earlier, everything we've got has REST interfaces behind it. And so one of the directions that things are very quickly going with Globus Online is integrating it into more and more systems in different interesting ways. So for example, on the inbound side, one of the things that one could do with the REST interfaces is basically take external group definitions and mirror them into Globus Online. We haven't made that trivial yet in terms of nice point-and-click GUIs to sort of set that all up, but that's all sort of on the roadmap. But all the fundamental stuff is there. And then likewise, on the outbound side, these same groups can be used for other things, and not just by us, but by even other people's custom web applications. And so, for example, KBase, which is a Department of Energy Systems Biology project, is using groups and Globus identities as the basis for the KBase project. So these same groups could be used for access control to these third-party web applications. And we have a variety of users doing our sites building really interesting custom web applications using this functionality. So that's groups. Final little bit I'll just show for 1 minute here is we have a command line interface, and the key trick of the command line interface is that instead of shipping you clients you have to run locally, what we do is provide you the ability to do SSHs to an account at Globus Online where you can run commands. So I can say things like status -a, the last 3 transfers that I've done. I can also say output that in key value form. Let me try to remember what the fields were on this. So I could task ID, label, status, pipe to grep for succeed. Right? So I can start creating scripts and things like that around that. I can also do this all interactively. So we also have a nice interactive mode on it, so I can log into it and get a restricted shell where I can type help to see the command, so I can do transfers and deletes, and everything I can do through the web GUI I can do through this interface. All commands have a -h, and there's also man pages. Right? So every account gets this. The one thing you need to do in your system to set that up is in your profile and manage identities. You just need to add your public key right here. Add it as an authorized key, and then it's standard SSH keys for getting in there. So I'm not going to show any more on the CLI in interest of time. So let me just pop out last couple slides, and then I'll take any final questions you all have. So as I mentioned, we've got a Globus Connect multi-user that is for servers. If you have a server with a bunch of users that you want to make available, connect to Globus Online, that it's really just a fancy installer, simple installer around GridFTP and the MyProxy Online CA, but it's trivial install, gets your systems up. I mentioned this platform as a service. This is another part of our overall strategy and direction of making it so that others can leverage everything we're doing through our REST APIs and through our interfaces like OAuth to build their own web applications, even non-web applications. I mentioned KBase. University of Exeter is building a campus data repository, or has actually deployed one now on this. Globus Genomics is a product that we're doing ourselves, which puts a Galaxy genomics analysis environment on top of Globus Online for use. So I'll skip past that. And so then the final thing I'll say is that, again, who are we? We're University of Chicago, nonprofit service provider to this nonprofit research community. But a key challenge we have, like anyone else doing interesting software in this space, is sustainability. And so to that end, what we've decided to do is we've introduced sort of a freemium model where some of the capabilities that you saw today, particularly all the file transfer and synchronization, the ability to create endpoints, even the ability to access shared endpoints, is all free and will remain free. But if you want to create and manage shared endpoints, that we have what we call a plus subscription, and we'll, in the next small number of weeks, we'll be rolling out the ability to do credit card support for that. That'll also get you peer-to-peer transfer and sharing. I mentioned debugging a Globus Connect. I was actually doing that last night, doing transfers between my Mac at work and my laptop at home, peer-to-peer, and it was just working. So that's coming. We also have what we call provider plans, which are more designed for universities, institutions, projects, right? Where it's a bundle of plus subscriptions that you can hand out to whoever you want to get that advanced functionality. Plus it's some extra features like, of course, support is a biggie. That management console I showed, the flight control is part of that. We're starting to add some reporting interfaces so I can see historical usage. And then also branded websites. So one of the features we have is I can do things like say, I want a globus.rcc.u Chicago. University of Chicago, they have their branded site. It's just Globus Online, but it's a skin, right? Basically. And so there's a lot of interesting uses of this skinning capability. And then we have tie-ins to InCommon and other things like that, but I won't go into them now. So with that, thanks to all our sponsors, and give it a try.
So let's take some more questions. I can stick around as long as you need to.
Richard.
Okay, Steve, that was excellent, very interesting, and I think we have a question that's been around from Richard Jones.
Yes.
Richard, do you have? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, a couple of questions. One is about the VOMS credentials. We in OSG we already manage our groups through a VOMS server, and so we sort of hand out roles that way. Does it mean we have to manage a separate sort of set of roles in the database of users, or can we just leverage those proxies? Can a person just show up with one of those proxies and automatically get membership rights?
So in terms of, there's no integration today between VOMS credentials and group membership. It's, you know, one of the things that we've talked with a few people about, but it's, you know, haven't had the compelling use case yet to drive us to do that integration. But it does strike us as something that might be useful, of course. The second,
it sits beside the credential system for OSG.
Sorry, say again.
So it kind of sits in parallel to the authentication system that OSG uses.
Yeah, well, it's, exactly. So it's basically a separate group management system. Exactly. And now that's
even my personal user proxy is not really needed for this.
Right. Well, so that's where it's on. So then that said, you can also, I know various people who what they'll do is use their VOMS credential. You know, basically they'll do their grid proxy or their VOMS init, VOMS proxy init, get back the VOMS credential. And then there's some ways you can tie that into Globus Online so that you can actually, as a user, use your VOMS issued credential as the way when activating endpoints. And that's something that, you know, we've worked through, like, in fact, with EGI, we just recently deployed out some, you know, basically an end-to-end approach there, where sort of the model is very similar there, where you sort of get your VOMS credential, put that into a MyProxy server that EGI runs, and then using your EGI login, you go get that and use that in sort of for access via Globus Online. So it's not quite as clean as one might like some of that stuff, but it does, those bits do hold together. So it'd be interesting at some point, again, to understand exactly what the use case is, who's going to use this in what ways, and figure out what the exact integration that makes sense to do to make it easier for the users.
Okay, one piece of feedback to give is that Jefferson Lab, where I do experiments, has decided not to support the SRM, which is sort of the conventional way that people have gotten data shared around on the OSG, and instead they're supporting Globus Online. And so we have our own SRM out here, and so this looks like maybe this is going to be the lab's recommended way of getting things off the site and out onto the grid where we can, you know, do data processing on the OSG. So that's one reason why I had that question. Another one is with regard to sites that already have an SRM going. Can you just front that SRM, or do we need to configure all 15 of our grid FTP servers that sit behind it?
Yeah, so we do not have any integration with SRM with Globus Online, in part because of, you know, part of what you said is your previous comment, which is that, well, two reasons. One is that there seems to be some movement away from SRM in both US and Europe as a required capability or required feature. And two is some of the things that we do, such as sharing, actually become incredibly hard to do in an SRM setting. You know, we actually worked through some of the designs of what it might mean to do SRM integration a year and a half back. But so the short answer is no, we don't have it, and we're not intending on adding it. So if you want to use Globus Online with the system, yeah, you should map in all or some of the grid FTP servers. It's sort of your call. Now, there's some other work coming down the pipe here with Globus, which is adding, I know Brian Bockelman has done a bunch of work with grid FTP and LVM, the logical, it's LVS, I think. What are the logical virtual server, so that you can create a system that looks like one good FTP server, and it'll do local load balancing and stuff based, entirely inside the site. And so we're going to be doing some work to try and make that mainstream. But Brian's got that all working today. So if you're interested in some of the things like that, definitely reach out to him as well.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question or two. One is there a way to search for users, or it's just this username which they gave themselves?
In terms of search by name, like if they're
by name, surname, whatever.
So what I can do, so if I go back like to that group system, let me search this time for Maduri, right? So, or else I search for his whole name, Ravi Maduri. It's a guy in my group.
So there is a way. I was just testing it.
It's not turning up anything, and I suspect that's in part because we also have account privacy controls where I can say, I've got in my profile, the name I put next to my account email address, but I can also control the visibility of that. And so if I don't want even Globus Online users to see it, I can do that, right? So we've tried to make this so users don't have to be visible if they don't want to, and there are actually some strong use cases for that out of the NIH community. That's why we did that. But okay, the search is there on users. But
another question is, do you have a way to monitor, to have a view of total number of transfers going on at any moment, or total rate, or stuff like that?
Currently, let me go back to the view transfers page. You can do that. You can script it pretty easily from the command line interface. From here, there's no way to just filter on. Actually, I think there is a way to filter.
No, that is okay. A person doing transfer can see his transfers. But I'm wondering if if Globus Online has a way to get aggregate of all the transfers going on at the moment.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we have administration consoles where we can see all the transfers going on, which we use as part of our help desk and support function. It's actually kind of a subset of this or a superset of the flight control I showed earlier. We can't see the data.
Roughly, what's the order of magnitude of megabytes per second, or gigabytes per second?
The best option is to go out to the home page, and you can see, if you sort of watch the you'll see, actually that's within 30-second accurate current bandwidth being pumped through Globus Online. So it looks like
it's roughly gigabyte per second or something.
Yeah, maybe it looks like half a gigabit per second to gigabit per second now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is not just some extrapolation, but real number. Very nice. And the final question is it possible to have extrude the server as an endpoint, or will it be possible at some point?
So the question is having extrude D on an endpoint?
Yes.
I mean, so I think from my perspective, the answer to that is probably that, if you step back and say, I have a storage system and I can export that storage system in a variety of different ways. I can sort of connect it to Globus Online. I can make it available by extrude D. I can make it available for local use. I can put other services against that, whatever other services. So we'll play, we play fine with any other services that are against that local file system, because we're not making any assumptions about that the data has to come through us or anything like that. It's really just access to that system. But there is not any other integration of extrude D with Globus Online itself.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have another question. Do you foresee any way for jobs that are running on the OSG to be able to dynamically access shared data, or do you just see it sort of as something that you kind of pump by hand at intervals that are more governed by people?
That's actually a great question, and So I see, so in theory today, yes, you could on the fly as part of a Condor job access data for stage in or stage out from a shared endpoint. I'd say in theory because they haven't tested it well, they haven't tested against shared endpoint, and it's probably been a little while since it's been tried against normal endpoints, but about a year and a half back, the Condor team actually implemented Condor has this ability to do sort of pluggable approaches for staging data before and after jobs. And one of the pluggable approaches that they have that's, as my understanding is, a standard part of Condor now is actually using Globus Online for staging. And behind the scenes, what it's actually doing is coming through our command line interface to do the actual stuff. And so with that, like I said, in theory, what you could actually do is put in your class add to say, stage data directly from a shared endpoint, right to the compute node where you're going to be doing the analysis, and then when you're done, if you want, put it back to some other or the same endpoint directly from that compute node. But and if that, so I'd sort of volunteer that if somebody's interested in that use case and wants to push it, we'd be happy to help kind of work through debugging if anything's not working, if the bits have deteriorated a bit since those were originally created. We'd be happy to help get those, back up to speed with the Condor team to get it working.
It sounds like that's not contrary to intention. That's perfectly fine with you.
Yep, absolutely. That's, we have, realize that, I say, again, going back to the original use cases that somebody asked about, was that, our primary user audience mostly has been users of more traditional HPC facilities, HPC clusters, supercomputing centers, that sort of stuff. And so, in those sorts of settings where I do know of multiple users today who, as part of their HPC jobs, will even do things like after every time step, if they've got a simulation that's dumping out time steps, after each time step, they'll run a command off against Globus Online to start staging that time step data back off of the supercomputer to their local environment while the simulation continues with the next time step, right? So those sorts of integrations of making this a part of your overall workflow. I know the Swift group has also done integrations of Swift with Globus Online, so you can use Globus Online for transferring data around for your Swift jobs. So yeah, that absolutely is part of the intention.
And just one follow-up. Did someone else want to jump in?
Yeah, I was just gonna.
Just one follow-up.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that having the command line interface, which gives you everything that you can do from the web, would seem like, that's a natural place to integrate with any workflow application.
Yeah, and that command line works both SSH and GSI SSH. So if you have, going back to your credentials, you can actually add, in here you can add an X509 credential just by, basically pasting the PEM file. But essentially all we're doing is pulling out the DN and issuer. And having done that, you can now use GSI SSH to do all the stuff through the command line as well. And I think that's in fact how the Condor stuff does it. Since it's got the certificates in there that it already had code to propagate, it can now, from anywhere it's going, it can easily call out to Globus Online CLI through GSI SSH.
So that's how you would ship around your credentials with your jobs?
Sorry?
That's how you would ship your credentials off with your job?
Yeah, so that's the Condor will take care of shipping the credentials around, and then you can use those credentials that sort of land out at the wherever the Condor job's running to use those with GSI SSH to talk to Globus Online's command line interface.
Right, and so I can see this would be a very nice follow-up iForum topic for someone who has integrated in this way Globus Online from within their Condor job, using their X509 certificate. Just basically walk through all those details. That would be very, very interesting, and I think to a lot of users.
One more comment from me. I've just tested Globus Online. I installed it on my Mac, and I love how application looks like. Basically, now I have 4 icons, which is on my taskbar, which is Globus Connect and SkyDrive and Google Drive and Dropbox, and it looks basically the same. Like menu looks basically the same like SkyDrive. Now I'm wondering, would it be possible to see it as a directory, so that from my terminal I could just copy a file to the directory and it automatically sync to with my endpoint?
Yeah, it's actually we've had a lot of debates about that feature internally, and the reason we have not done that to date, it really goes back to the use cases, which is our target has been big data, right? Transferring and now sharing your big data, and when you start moving into the big data regime, what our experience has been, as we've talked through with a lot of different users, is that having that sort of the sort of Dropbox model or SkyDrive model of sync my entire cloud storage with my local system, kind of starts breaking down, because you tend to want to be much more careful about when and where you move your big data files. And so that's why we haven't done it. So our attitude has been, use the Dropbox for your small data or whatever your favorite service is. But that said, we're still interested in, sort of use cases. We're not interested in competing with Dropbox or SkyDrive directly. I mean, they have way more money and people that can drive those use cases. But
I agree, but on the other side, if you are already supporting big data, it's no problem to support small data. So if I would have an option to completely drop my SkyDrive and my Google Drive and my Dropbox, it would be really lovely.
So yeah, and the downside is that's a lot of coding, right? Making. So I've actually done a fair amount of looking into how the Dropboxes and SkyDrives really do integrate on the different desktop platforms and make that sync work flawlessly. And it's not trivial. Now that said, we do have mirroring, right? With this, we have that rsync-like capability. It's more explicit, but yeah, I mean, if that's, we hear that request from time to time, and so it's really a question of priorities and focus. And so far, it hasn't escalated high enough for us to invest that level of engineering to do that level of synchronization. But something we keep talking about internally.
Thank you.
So, Steve, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
So, I think this is a very interesting forum in the sense that you're talking to a group of site administrators by and large, and I think that's a really great group for you to engage. So, first, just a comment that I'd like to see, if there are more organized. More in this series of organized ways of engaging service providers. I think that would be a great, if we can fit it in efficiently. I know everybody, including you, are very busy, but just compliment you on doing that. The technical suggestion I had to do with a feature that we have been using for a long time in OSG, having to do with the call out, how the call out worked for the grid security interface. So, they had this Prima call out, and now work has gone on to modernize that, and we use this LC maps method. But it seems to me that, that what's happening there is that we're making an executable query to a local server, a GUMS or a VOBox server, and that might be a very efficient place to leverage applying a little technology. If we could get the Globus Connect multi-user to use a mechanism like that to talk to an existing GUMS or something, then maybe we could just inherit groups and roles from VOMs without having to do a whole lot of coding.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm getting end to end, but maybe that's a good offline conversation to try and understand. I mean, for me, it'll all come back to the question of what's the end to end use case and who will actually use it in practice. And if we can answer that, and then the final question will be money to implement it.
Yeah.
But,
So I mean, the problem we have, I use Dropbox like everybody else, and the problem with that sharing model is it really gets unwieldy when you have a large number of people, when people depart who shared stuff. So I think what's driving a lot of these questions is a kind of an intuitive sense on the part of maybe some of these service providers that that having if we've already got well-developed organizational structures, it'd be really nice to leverage them. That's kind of a technology-free statement.
Right. Yep.
One thing I wanted to mention is that we are planning a follow-up meeting here on Thursday at 2 o'clock Central, where we can follow up not only on these kinds of questions, but if people have a chance to try things out or think a little bit more about their specific use cases, and want to dig a little bit deeper, we'll have an informal chat in the iForum next Thursday at 2 o'clock. I guess it's August 8th. Okay, a lot of good questions. We didn't cover all of them, but I think there are more out there, but I think we can have an opportunity to come back at these again at some point. Any final questions from group? Okay, let's, okay, Miha has one here. Okay, so Miha is saying something.
Is it what will be the minimum set of features for Joe Scientist user?
Yeah, sounds like.
I'm not sure I understand the question
entirely.
Well,
the before he says you've added a ton of features since SC 2012 when he first saw Globus Online.
Yep.
I mean, I think the context of the question sort of comes from helping the end user who is I think this is actually right in line with the philosophy that you started off with. It should be as easy as using Netflix and so forth. We need to make these tools a lot easier, and so for the quote-unquote Joe the scientist or Joe the biologist who is not computing savvy and doesn't have time to learn things, what are the minimal set of features? So,
yeah, and I think the first order boils down to this page right here, right? It's that transfer page. It's a file browser and some few controls around sharing. And that's what we're trying to boil things down to in some sense. But the challenge is that there's of course lots of different sub-use cases that we're trying to make easy as well. So it's not sure I have one specific minimum set. But from our perspective, it does come back to this web interface, is the few main pages here.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, I think I want to thank you, Steve. This was really a nice presentation, and I agree that every time I see this, I see more and more interesting capabilities, and so it's definitely getting better all the time. So we're very interested to see how we can introduce this out into the OSG community and how we can use it for other, for various contexts and applications. So thank you.